Radio Free Skaro!
Hello everyone, welcome to Radio Free Skaro, episode number 782. I am Stephen in Edmonton, and this kicks off our Gallifrey One retrospective, Tales from Gallifrey One. Obviously we can't be at Gallifrey One this year, no one can, because there's a global pandemic on, so we are using this opportunity to sort of look back at the many different Gallifrey Ones, or Gallifreys One, that we attended over the years. We gathered interviews at, we did live shows at, we had a grand time. So this kicks it off. Today, the Thursday, usually is, I think we do a lobby con in the evening, I think, at some point in the olden days. But in lieu of that, we're bringing you 3 interviews from 3 different Gallifrey Ones. The first one with Graeme Harper. Boy, like our second Gallifrey One ever, and we get to knock Graeme Harper off the bucket list. What a great chat it was. He came on the Saturday at Gallifrey One. I remember we interviewed, 4 different people at that point. We interviewed Nick Briggs, Rob Shearman, Phil Ford, and then Graeme Harper. And I think Phil Ford was second. And we talked to Phil Ford, who was great. We had interviewed him before, just before The Waters of Mars came out. And then he said, because we had sort of been angling to get Graeme Harper all weekend, and he said, I know where he is, I saw him downstairs. So he went downstairs to go find Graeme Harper, while I think we talked to Nick Briggs or Rob Shearman. I can't remember which order those were in. And by the time we were done the third interview, because it was basically back to back to back to back, up pops Phil Ford into dragging Graeme Harper with him to be interviewed by 3 very excited lads from Canada in 2010. That's why forever that Phil Ford will be known as friend of the show, Phil Ford, if only for his contributions for Doctor Who, but also just because he wrangled Graeme Harper for us. So here is that chat from 2010 with Graeme Harper.
Hello, here we are in the lobby again with me, Stephen,
Warren, and Chris,
and here legendary Doctor Who director Graeme Harper. Hello, Graeme.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. I was astounded when I heard this last night. This is your first trip, not only to a Doctor Who convention in America, but America itself.
It is. It's extraordinary. I've wanted to come to America all my life. For 2 reasons. One, because I would love to come to the States before anyway. Right. And 2, because I love Westerns and I wanted to come. So I thought my career would take me to America so I could make Westerns. Because that's what I want to do.
Are you going to make a Western now?
I've got a project in my brain which I'm going to try and sell. Nobody knows about it yet. But I know I'm desperate to do a Western. But I have something which I think will be interesting. I hope for the British people and Welsh people, because it's going to start in Wales but end up in America. But it's an aspect of the West that not many people know that I think is going to astound you, if I can sell it.
I'm very intrigued by this.
Yep.
How long have you been in the directing game then?
I started directing in... my first job was, I think, 1983. Really? Which was a series, a British soap called Angels, which was about nurses in hospitals, and they were, in those days, they were nicknamed Angels.
Right. Because you had been like a production assistant, was it, at the BBC?
Yeah, I started as a runner, call boy, floor assistant. They called them call boy, floor assistants in those days. But I started. Call boy sounds like a rent boy, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
But we were called floor assistants, which is a runner. So I started in 1966 at BBC in London in television, and I did that job for 3 years, then became an assistant floor manager, which is like a second assistant director then a first assistant director, and then I bashed on the door for 3 years while I was doing that job, and finally persuaded somebody to let me become a director.
Right. Because you had worked as assistant floor director on a few Doctor Who's.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, like the Seeds of Doom with Douglas Camfield.
Oh, that was
one.
memorable. Yeah.
Was he an inspiration in
he was
becoming a director?
I worked with Douglas several times as his first assistant, but we just hit it off. He and I were very, very close friends. By the time I worked with him, came to the end of the first job I ever did with him, he asked for me on several jobs because he really liked working with me, and me with him. We just hit it off. Mm-hmm. I thought he was brilliant. He was a very funny man. He was ex-SAS, so he was and he was a captain, if I remember rightly. But he was drummed out of the SAS because on some kind of training exercise he fell and broke both his ankles, and that was the end of his career as a captain in the SAS. And I think then he had to look for other careers, and he came into television, I think as an assistant director, and then eventually became a director.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were assistant director on Warrior's Gate, which many legends say you directed half the episode of that in 1981 when Paul Joyce was fired for about half an hour. but how much of that story did you actually step in for?
No, I'll put it right.
Yeah,
it wasn't that I took over. What happened was Paul is a director in his own right to this day, and he's a very, very fine director. He had some fabulous ideas as a director for that story. What he wasn't used to was the fast turnaround that Doctor Who was. He didn't understand straight away. What he really had to do was, he could plan, but he had to write camera. You actually had to plan how you're going to shoot that with multi-camera studios, and this story was all studio. There was no location work, if I remember right. It was all set in spaceships and then on a planet and the void.
Yeah.
So, and Warrior's Gate in the void. He planned. He knew what he wanted from the artist. What he didn't do was, because he thought somebody else did it, was a camera script. In other words, write out and plan how many shots he wanted in each scene and how he's going to cover, that he had to write. And actually, a director in those days had to do their own camera plan, how those cameras got from set to set without too much time being wasted, and all the cabling. Otherwise, it could get into a terrible mess. And when I said to him, as a first, I had to keep challenging, I need your camera script, I need your camera plan. And he said, yes, it's coming, but it never did. When we started rehearsing, of course, I had no camera plan, no camera script. I didn't know how he was going to do it for me to be able to do my job of organising the studio and how we could shoot it, the order of events. And then I eventually said to him, I actually need you to give me a camera plan, but to do that you have to do a camera script. And he said, Jonathan Miller was a very famous arty director, but very classy arty director, who did big Shakespearean shows with 9 weeks of rehearsal. We only had 5 days. He got his assistants he'd walk around saying, and I'd like a 2-shot here, and I'd like a single there, and he thought that's how we should do it. So I then walked around with him whilst he was rehearsing scenes and worked out all his shots with him. He would describe kind of what he wanted, and I would write out the shots, and I would then sit up all night doing his camera script, and then I would draw his camera plan. That's what I did. When he fell behind in the recording because it's very complex, and also because I'd worked out the coverage. I didn't direct it, I just worked out the coverage. He could then change that if he wanted to, but we started with something. And things went wrong for him. But in fact, he talked to the producer and persuaded him to let him have a go and come back in, etc. He was very new. He'd only done one other programme. He'd only directed one other thing, which was a play that he'd written, but it was simpler than a Doctor Who. So what happened was he then carried on with kind of my plan of coverage of his shots, of his show. But he directed the performances, the actual drama and the storytelling were his. I just covered it for him, with his approval as well. But I did all that boring donkey work that we actually have to do. But it's not boring, it's actually visualising how you're going to do it.
Right.
He had a visual and he would describe that, but he didn't talk to me in shots, he talked to me in vision of the kind of group shot here, and then maybe we see. So that's kind of how it was done. Now that's totally different. He's not like, now he's a fully fledged experienced director, but then it was the second thing he'd ever done, and I was quite an experienced first by then, so I had a clue of technically how to put it together.
Right. And your first Doctor Who story was one of your more or less first directing jobs on TV as well, more or less. Caves of Androzani, of course. Which also has a lot of visual style to it. And the fact that Paul Joyce fell behind on his, but your directing style on that was so different that how did you manage to get everything in without going...
I fell behind, folks.
Did you?
I decided on a plan of campaign, not because I was being a clever tit, but I just had a vision of how it could be, how it should change. Because Doctor Who, and this story was brilliant, it required a certain... I like pace and energy, I like that, you'll hear me say that a lot. I didn't even know I said it until kind of recently that I say it so much as I do, but I have it in my brain to say, come on, let's kick it up the backside, let's really move this, don't let's get it boring, don't let's slow down, keep the energy flow, so that the gentler scenes can really pay off by being gentle. And I feel that today. I'm saying that badly, I still feel that today. I've said so much I've forgotten the question. The style and how I did it. I decided that although it was multi-camera studio, it was a great action piece. It had lots of chase and running and whatever. And explosions and guns being fired. What I decided was I was going to take a chance and try and do as much as I could single camera work, which meant that it could be lit for each shot properly, and all the action stuff would pay off by doing that and have plenty of material to cut, because in action I knew that when you're doing action you need lots of coverage to make the pace and energy of different shots. If you watch something like Bullet, watch the way that car chase is done. It's probably lots of repeats from different angles of sections of driving that just used over and over again from different angles, but it is brilliant because it's fast cutting of this pacey, energetic and very dangerous car chase.
It's all lies.
And it is all lies, he says. This is Nicholas Briggs who's just walked past and being a pain. So I knew that we had to get... and also to give it lovely lighting, you had to do each shot separately. But of course it's a multi-camera studio. The idea is that you actually travel fast through scenes because you're actually cutting it together as you go along with a vision mixer. Well, I cut that down at least by half, but I of course got to a position where I was going to overrun, and there's no overrunning in those days. There was no overruns. 10 o'clock the electricians pulled the plug and that was the end of it, whether you'd finished or not. So I got into trouble when there were some scenes that had to be dropped because I never had the time to shoot those. But we still got a good chance of it, and fortunately, because it was good, I still remained employed.
Do you ever find that it's been praised up and down as the best Doctor Who story, classic series? Did you have any inkling while you were making it that you had something special, or was it just kind of... I mean, obviously you were trying new things and everything, but you didn't have a feeling that this was going to be something very different, or not? No,
I suppose I couldn't understand how Doctor Who, all the time I'd worked on it, I mean, Dougie was a master at action and adventure, and his stuff has a twinkle, even today. I mean, I suppose sometimes it feels slower than the way we make things now, but still exciting, and he knew how to direct actors and get something good. But his visuals were good, his coverage was good. I didn't have any idea that I'd have all this success from Doctor Who, and especially with that story. And now, in 2009, it wins an award as being... Now look, we've got to keep our feet on the ground here. That was 6,700 people in England who subscribed to Doctor Who magazine that voted that. If you took all the fandom and all the people, the public who watched Doctor Who, both in America, France, everywhere, if they had seen everything, I put my money on at least Blink would beat it. It has to, because it was a fantastic story, beautifully made, exciting, dangerous, really scary, and I think I hope it will be second or third or somewhere around it, because it was a great piece of writing, and you couldn't go wrong with it in that sense. It was a great story. So you were bound to have something good out. Whoever did it would get a good story and a good action out of it. But for it to win the top out of all the episodes that have been since 1963, that's extraordinary. I cannot tell you how surprised I was.
Well, I mean, your style was a lot different than BBC directors at the time, because most of them, when the multi-camera studio set up, were all doing it from the control. I mean, you were one of those rare directors that were doing it from the floor.
Yeah,
Did you get a lot of like flack or grief, or was it just a chosen style for directors to do it from the control room?
There were one or two people doing it, so as a first, I watched. If you're a first assistant, you're a first assistant on location and a floor manager really in the studio. When you're in the studio, I work with a lot of good as well as a lot of bad directors. I work with a lot of great directors. The really great directors were with their actors and crew on the floor. Now, a producer and all the technical guys up in the gallery would say that's a waste of time, because in your gallery, your voice is heard by everybody. On the floor, you have to be near a boom, a microphone, or a microphone has to be near your face to pick up all the dialogue. So the vision mixer who's upstairs, she's not down with you. You can rehearse multi-camera studio work on the floor, but you have to have a talk back to the gallery. They have to know your changes, because you're changing. Right, cut that shot. Cut it at this dialogue. Do it. You might want to change everything. Everybody's got to know those changes, so that they know when to do all their cueing of lighting changes and camera moves and camera shot changes. So by doing that, it was dangerous. And other people were being dangerous. But it became more and more the norm, not just after me, but after several other directors before me had done that. You suddenly saw better results, that was why. So I could never stop doing that. I felt secure by being with the crew and seeing the problems on the floor, by being there rather than being up in the gallery going, why can't the camera move more to the left? Because there's something in the way that we can't move, because it's holding the setup. Right. Well, if I knew that by being on the floor, I wouldn't have to ask me. Those seconds would be... Can you imagine 20 seconds of discussion about something which I could see on the floor if I was there? If you multiply that by 40 or 50 times, that's quite a few minutes that we need to shoot. So that's why I did it.
It also gives you a chance to be more close with the actors, I'm assuming. Peter Davison has said it's his favorite story because of the direction, that somebody really gave him direction, the one-on-one, as opposed to someone shouting down through a control room. I can only assume that you get better performances out of the actors from that way too.
I could talk to them directly. Normally what you do is, if you're in the gallery above as God, looking down through a glass window at the action, if you can see it, there's all that paraphernalia of lights in it. If you're passing in, would you ask Peter Davison that when he says that line and he's by the doorway or he's about to press the button, could you say the line and then press the button and then do something else? By the time that was relayed, and Peter said, what? How do you mean, which button? Oh, there, and that second's gone. If I'm on the floor, Peter, wouldn't it be great if you did that to that? It's done, quickly, sorted. And they have confidence in you. Otherwise, you've got this, what is he doing? Who is it? What's going on? And you have this waste of time. Although it's been done for many years before and very successfully, quite stayed, and we needed to kick Doctor Who up the backside in the energy levels and the way we shot it. I think it needed help, and it did. I think Doctor Who, the next series after Tales of Gallifrey, I thought was terrific. I wasn't involved in it. I wasn't involved in it.
Your Revelation of the Daleks.
No, the Revelation of the end. Yeah. I knew it was with Colin 1 year, but I thought it was 2 years later. No, I thought that series was brilliant. I don't know how they shot it, I can't remember, but I thought it was quite dark, and Colin's performance was quite sarcastic and dark. Brilliant new way of playing Doctor Who, which may not have been popular in some quarters, but I thought it was another Doctor Who. It was a great Doctor Who.
How did you like you mentioned Daleks, were you thinking of new ways of shooting them?
The Daleks?
Yeah, it's a lot. They were shot a lot from underneath and such. There are a lot of different angles and shot as opposed to previous classic episodes.
I'd add to that, what inspirations did you have? Because some of the stuff in there looks like a French art film. It doesn't look anything like normal Doctor Who, and it struck me even as a kid just how amazingly different Revelation looked, even compared to Tales of Gallifrey.
Even compared to different Dalek episodes for the most part. Were you consciously looking to reinvent ways of shooting the Daleks to make them more frightening or imposing.
Sorry, Terry Nation. I always thought the Daleks looked like dustbins.
So do we.
But how do you make? I don't mean this. It sounds rude and crude and cheap and easy for me to say. How do you make Daleks look really dangerous? Well, you have to shoot. I think you have to. Russell will disagree with me on this. Mm-hmm. He doesn't understand how you can shoot low angles. There are certain moments when you have to shoot low angles. What's that point of view is a low angle? An ant, a dog? Which person's point of view is that? Because when you're watching television, it's someone's point of view of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Human being's point of view. It's got to be a midget if you're always low angle with the Daleks. But I think you make them look grotesque and terrifying. If you've got an empty, low angle empty shot and then suddenly this thing comes looming in above you, that's quite creepy. And that's why I did it, to try and make... They were quite limited in the way they moved and what happened to them. They're better now, but in those days it was the guys who ran around in them, it was quite restrictive what they could do. So they needed help in the horror and the fear that the Daleks could bring. And I tried to help that by just thinking of Spielberg, thinking of all the great people I loved, what they did. Be low, be monstrous, be exciting, try and find new angles, new ways, and don't be afraid, silly boy that I am, of time, because all that takes time to do, to get low angle, get the sorted out, and you're shooting off the set above because there's no roof. That all takes time to kind of correct. And I was stupid and brave and silly and whatever to actually go for it, and I got into trouble in terms of time. And wait, what's going on, Graham? You've got to finish, and you've only got half a scene done. But if you watch that studio tape of me running around like a loony with 4 cameras in different places, I mean, what a silly way to make a programme. But it was brilliant because we were able to achieve, and everybody wanted to do it. They just saw this lunatic rushing around, and for some reason, those studio guys would tell me off. Why are you being so... You pace yourself, plan it. You should come in with a different kind of plan or whatever. But they still wanted to do it because it was exciting, and that's kind of what comes over, I hope. It's funny, sorry, but...
No, go ahead.
A lot of people ask me, I never watched it back. Once it went out in the 80s, I never really watched. I didn't watch Caves. I moved on. I was doing lots of other different shows. So I never watched it. When it won this award last year, I always talked about it beforehand as, I think it probably feels creaky and slow and whatever. When it won its award, I asked someone, because I haven't got a copy, to send me a copy of it so I could see it, to see why it won. Well, how did this from the 80s win against what we've just done? It had energy, and it was rocking along, and the performances were... There was some great performance, great acting,
absolutely.
And I think that's what sold it. It was a great bit of storytelling.
So how did you come then, 21 odd years later, to work with the new series?
And was that a difficult transition going from... I guess not, because you've moved along to all the new techniques and ways of doing things.
A really extraordinary thing happened, but when I heard it was coming back, I was asked in the 90s to do a movie, which then got pulled for all sorts of reasons which we're not going to go into here, but because I'd be sued. There was a very the BBC, I don't think they had their fingers burnt. They shouldn't have been making something because they sold the rights. That's what happened for a period of time, and so they shouldn't have been making a film. It was pulled, and Tom Baker and I were paid off, and that was the end of that. So I nearly had an opportunity to show what I could do then. But of course Russell eventually came along and just made it into more than I could ever do in the 90s. I mean, his vision was brilliant. But when I heard he was coming, I knew Russell a bit. We'd worked together 20 years before. We'd worked together on 2 shows. He was... we worked together, that's all. It was in a small way. He was like me. He was an assistant director, offering he was part of a major magazine program for children. I was also the main director on. He was then a script doctor on another show I did. So our paths had crossed several times, but we didn't know each other very well. But I knew his telephone number and his address. So when I heard he was going to become this fantastic executive producer of Doctor Who, I wrote to him and said, I will die to just have one go. Could I be part of your thinking for being one of the directors on the series? And he wrote back saying, at that stage it wasn't up to him. There was a committee kind of approval of this, but my name was definitely on the list, and blah blah. Well, I got another job, a big action series up in the north of England about firefighting, etc., in petrochemical factories. So I was on to a big action thing. And I had to forget Doctor Who. I wasn't going to get anywhere, and I didn't hear that I was being asked for at all, so I carried on. The next year, the second series, now with David Tennant, Russell and Phil asked for me to go and meet them for lunch to have a chat about it, and we discussed the possibility of me coming back. And at the end of the lunch, Russell said, "Listen, we both nodded at each other. We want you to come back. We'd love you to be with us." And I said to Phil, once it was we'd relaxed and I was now drinking, thinking, "Oh, I've got I'm getting back to Doctor Who, yeah," and expecting to see 10 other people and mates that I've been working alongside as well. And I wasn't. I was the only one from that period of the 80s. But I said to Phil, "What was it? What suddenly made you choose me to come back? What was?" And he said, "Well, two things. One is we liked you. We liked your enthusiasm when we met. But secondly, if you could do 3 great endings in 1983 or 84, I think it was. If you could do the 3 action endings that you did, big cliffhangers, the way you did, with what little you had in those days, and make it as exciting as you did, you've got to be here. You've got to come back and do one here. So we're going to give you an A block." Well, what happened was, I just thought, well, wow, isn't that extraordinary? Because it was archaic probably in the 80s. But what happened was, I then got a contract to say I was doing 2 blocks. And guess what? The Cybermen, and then finally a Cyberman War with Daleks. If you're going to come back to do Doctor Who, you couldn't ask for better. I was absolutely shocked, surprised, and that's it.
It was a mammoth block too, like 4 episodes, all Cybermen, all
52
battles.
days of shoot, all in straight off. It was. They'll never do that again.
No.
We got into trouble, but we got there in the end.
Was it rough? Was it rough to do that? I mean,
It was.
that's
I
astounding
was going to
to
do
think
it.
about.
There was no way I was going to walk away from it, but. And I was terrified. God, what the responsibility with these 2 iconic enemies. You can easily cock up. You could really make a mess of it. But I hadn't kind of taken on board what a fantastic crew they were that make Doctor Who. It's absolutely brilliant to this day. And it was the same in the 80s, that same care and love. Even though there was no money, it was creaky sets or whatever, there was still the love. Every crew member and every artist came on board, wanted to be there. They love it. It wasn't a job, it was a joy.
And you went on to do like a good chunk of the. I think you probably directed the most new series episodes out of any directors. I mean, I think so. Although I have a feeling Eros has probably done, if he hasn't, Eros Lynn, yes,
I think probably equalled, if not may have beaten that. I don't know. Right. But yeah, I was amazed. 12 episodes. It's absolutely extraordinary. I
really
never expected to get that. I was lucky to get one story.
And if I could just thank you personally for Utopia, which I think is by far the best, and by far the best directed episode of the new series. In fact, it rivals Caves for me. It's an amazing piece of work, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It's got some nice pace and energy in it. One thing
Yes,
it does, it really does. I have to ask though, one theme that I've noticed in all of your work, not all of your work, but a lot of your episodes, machine guns. Even in the future, I notice there's machine guns and everything. It sort of brings, it's symbolic of sort of the gritty realism, if you will, that is often prevalent in your episodes. Is that a conscious choice on your part?
It wasn't that, because there were 2 reasons why. Well, there was no... lasers from space weapons cost money, take time to do, post-production. And John Nathan Turner, the producer then, who I knew ever so well, we come up together, and we were good friends. So he was my boss, but we were able to talk to each other equally. I mean, he didn't try and pull one over me. He was always there was a great admiration to each other. we discussed it at length, and he said, be careful how many battles, how you use your weapons, because each time you put a laser beam on is time and money, and you don't have much money for post-production on this, so you've got to be careful. And we were living through Maggie Thatcher's days, and it was kind of a Thatcher era in the story. So I said, why don't we use machine guns, so AK-47s, and make this planet have guns. So the only things because if you've got Daleks, sorry, what am I saying? I'm thinking of Revelation of the Daleks.
That's right.
But that's another story.
Also had its machine guns too. Yeah.
That's correct. I decided to do it that way because the lasers had to be for. If you had lasers on Daleks and lasers coming out of guns, how were they going to afford that in the time? And we weren't going to finish. But in Caves, I decided we should use machine guns and make it another planet, but they happen to use live ammunition, whatever. A, we could afford that, and B, they're noisy where lasers aren't. And you could get and also in the chases to do bullet effects, chasing after the Doc as he was chasing, running away. That was a bit more interesting to me. I don't like electronic music, and I don't like. I'm not into lasers. I love Star Wars, and I like what they did in that. So that's the reason why we did it that way, and I found that more exciting, and it was cost effective. That was why.
One last question before we let you go.
It paid off. It was a choice that in the end I think paid off.
Oh, absolutely did. Yeah, it was visually exciting and everything. But anyway, one last question before you go, because you got stuff to do.
We can go to 7. Do it.
We could go to 7.
Yeah, go on.
We're going to keep going then.
Yeah, go on.
You're obviously not directing for the upcoming series, but have you been in talks to direct for future series of Doctor Who?
I have been asked. I asked my agent if she would check out whether the new regime would consider me, and if not, I was then going to look for other work, obviously. But if there was interest, then I would check out when early part of the series, latter part. But if they weren't, then I could just. I'd done 12, and I would have to probably accept that. And they said new regime. We'd love to work with Graeme, but maybe we have to kind of stick with a new clean sweep, new blood.
Yeah.
So so I got another job offered to me, and I started doing that. The day I got the job, there was a phone call. Could we meet Graeme for the new series? And I said, well, check my availability dates. And I wasn't free at that stage to do something that was happening 3 weeks from that date. And I couldn't do it because I'd said yes. I hadn't signed, strange enough, but I'd said yes, and I didn't want to renege on that. That's not fair. So I said no, but I will be free later. Would you come back? And they said possibly. So and then I finished that job, had a holiday for 4 weeks. So this is about 3 months later. I had a chance of another job come up, but I hadn't been offered it. It wasn't firm. The day it was offered, I said yes, thank you very much. Not that day, but the next day they came back again, Doctor Who, and asked if I would. When was I free? And I wasn't. So I have been asked twice for the last series. So, but whether they take that as I'm not interested anymore, I have no idea. Maybe I won't get back. I don't know. We'll see. I would love to. I actually would enjoy just one more go with Matt, because I think he looks really, really exciting. Mm-hmm. David was brilliant. That's a hard act to follow, but I think maybe they've got the right man.
Well, I mean, we talked about pace and energy. David Tennant probably brought a lot of pace and energy. Was it easy to work with an actor so ready to really throw everything into it?
Easy. It was easy from that point of view, because we both, I think all the dress, we all understood what we were dealing with, and David did, and I did, and all the other directors. I think they all have that energy, all of them. This new series, I think it's mind blowing. The storytelling is really good, and we also know when to pull back and actually enjoy the slower, gentler, and darker moods.
Because everyone says that you've been an action director, but there are actual, there's great disparity, I think, in the action sequences, which are loud and such. But some of the really, like in Revelation of the Daleks, when they're like really tight close-ups on Davros, played by Terry Malloy. There, is that a conscious effort on your part to really make such a big gap between the two types of scenes?
Yes, yes, that's what I meant. I know I'm heard to say, pace and energy, let's go, kick you out the backside. Because when you get to the more the intellectual discussions between Davros and Doctor and the mind games that they play with each other, as well as in the new series with Davros and the mind games again, even bigger, more so, those then you can afford, if you've had pace and electric kind of energy going through the whole story up to that moment, then when you can slow it down and it pays off. You can appreciate and enjoy, and you've also got time because you've made up for the time by you can afford just a little bit more time to enjoy, let the actors enjoy playing those fantastic scenes. Slower.
Yes. Well, I think we speak for many a Doctor Who fan, and that we hope you do work for the new series again.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully your phone will ring when you are not busy, when the time comes.
Yeah, or even when I'm busy. No, I hope so too. Yeah.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your trip in America, and enjoy the rest of the time at Gallifrey here, Graeme.
Oh, thank you very much.
For being on the show.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that. My favorite bit, of course, because he was heading off to supper or something, but I think he was enjoying the chat enough that he started. We knew that he was heading off, and we had a limited amount of time. But he looked at his watch and said, "Go on, I'll give you 7 more minutes" or something like that. It was great. He was super fabulous. Loads of pace and energy. Next up is from 2011. This is back when we just the way that the logistics set up. We had access to the green room, being the official podcast of Gallifrey One, and so we sort of set up camp right outside, and we managed to sit in there while Tracie Simpson was in between panels, and halfway through the interview, you could hear clearly that some panel has let out, and the green room has just gotten a lot busier and a lot louder. So apologies for that, but whatever, it was 10 years ago. We can't tell people to be quiet after an exuberant panel. Anyway, it's great, and I do like that. Tracie Simpson sort of says, "Yeah, I've wrapped up Doctor Who, and I'm pretty much done with it." But no, she's not. She would return, of course, later on after her first appearance, and would indeed appear subsequently at Gallifrey One. But here is her first appearance at Gallifrey One, our chat with Tracie Simpson from 2011.
Hello, this is Stephen.
Warren and Chris.
And with us today is producer, production manager Tracie Simpson of the old series, the recently departed from Doctor Who Tracie Simpson, after pretty much running the show for 5 years. Is that right?
It is, and hello.
Hello to you. What are the actual duties of production manager, what you did for the first 4 years on the show?
Production manager, I mean, it's quite boring. It's financial. It's setting up the budget.
Right.
It's crewing, making sure you've got a brilliant crew in place. It's looking after the schedule, making sure everything runs like clockwise, and just being a mother to everyone, really.
Right.
They all come to me with their problems.
How did you like that then?
I love it.
Really?
It makes you feel very, very wanted.
Is there like a sort of a matronly gene running through all production managers then in that regard?
Do you know what? There might be.
Yeah?
There might be, yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly on Doctor Who, it's the focal point of the production, and someone that they know they can go to if there's a problem.
Right. How did you come to work on the show?
I was working for BBC Wales, and I was working as a line producer on a local drama series called Belonging. And I was setting that up, and Julie Gardner, who was head of drama at BBC Wales, and who obviously brought Doctor Who with Russell T, she asked me if I would just go on to help Doctor Who, because it was setting up and it was getting very, very busy, and just for a couple of weeks before my own series was due to start. So I met the gorgeous Phil Collinson, who I immediately fell in love with. And we worked together for a couple of weeks. And then Julie said to me, I tell you what, Tracie, can I meet you for lunch? I said, yes, no problem. And she said, you're not going back to belonging. You're staying on Doctor Who. It's fine. That suits me fine. Because if you go back, Phil Collinson will physically kill me. Mm-hmm. So I stayed on Doctor Who, and I line managed, production managed it for the first 4 seasons, and then Julian Russell gave me the chance to produce, which was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. The first week or so of shooting has sort of gone down in legend as the most chaotic in the show's history, where Phil Collinson, I think, even said after 1 week you were 3 weeks
That's
behind.
Right, and that is completely true. We started off in London, and again I was meant to be working in the office, and I got this phone call from Phil saying, "Can you just pop up just for one night, just for the night shoot, and we'll go over the schedule." I remember being sat outside the London Eye, or next to the London Eye, with Phil, and he was there with his head in his hands. It's massive, and it's such a responsibility, isn't it? And there was such panic. Oh my gosh, are we going to make it? But we were fine, and we looked at the schedule again. We did a bit of rejigging, and then Phil said, "Can you stay for a couple of days longer?" And Phil hadn't even brought a suitcase, so I eventually stayed up in London for 2 weeks with him because he wouldn't let me go home. So it just meant a daily visit to Marks and Spencer to get a fresh pair of knickers.
Right.
But yeah, and I mean after that it sort of settled down. I mean we sort of started to get to know how to do it, and.
What do you think the problem was then? Was it just being green to a whole new way of making the show?
Exactly. Or? It was, I mean, I think that in scheduling it, we scheduled it as we would have scheduled dramas that we'd worked on in the past. Doctor Who is, when you factor in the CGI, the brack effects, we were probably being a bit naive in thinking that we could do it within the time. And it's, we wanted it to look fantastic, and all that does take time. But yes, Phil will admit we were probably about 3 weeks behind in the first week.
Was there any time during that time that you just thought that we're going to fail? Like
every day.
Really?
No, I mean, God, you've got Russell T Davis's enthusiasm, Julie Gardner's enthusiasm, Phil's passion.
Right.
And even though we were getting behind, I knew we were going to make it, and I knew it was going to be brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Was it at all intimidating to go from this drama to what was not only the jewel in the crown to be, but untested? They didn't know if it was going to work or not.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, we had that responsibility was on all of our shoulders. So yeah, intimidating, frightening, and all that, but very, very exciting. And God, when I look back now, how rewarding as well.
Right. Were you a fan of the show before you worked on the old show?
Yes, I mean, every Saturday night I was a John Pertwee fan, and every Saturday night we had a panel this morning. We were saying most people actually brought up. I was brought up on Doctor Who. I couldn't really. I haven't got an encyclopedic knowledge.
You weren't competing with Phil or Russell, basically. No. So, sorry, excuse me. I'm just wondering. So at the time, then, I mean, no one really knew that Doctor Who was going to be a success. It was sort of, until Rose went out on March 26, 2005. Remember that date now because it's a moment in history.
Yeah.
The public and the press immediately loved it. How did that feel then to see something you had worked on for so long and hard to actually just be phenomenally received by the public?
Oh, it was just, it really brought shivers to me. It was unbelievable. It made all that hard work worth it.
So what was it like then? What was sort of the mood on the whole set? Has it changed between different production crews and different actors as the Doctor? Has it sort of changed throughout the years that you were on it? Because you worked with all 3 of the new series Doctors.
Yes, yeah. Each Doctor has brought their own sort of energy. The crew has more or less been consistent all the way through. So even with Chris going, then David comes on board. And all the Doctors I think will say that it is like a big family and what have you. So I think because the crew were consistent, it just sort of maintained that. I mean, it's a lovely atmosphere on set. It's
right, because you're there pretty much for every frame of production that's
Yes.
being shot,
Yeah.
more or less. It's not
Yeah.
like the producer, Phil's there sometimes as well, but like the executive, like Russell and Julie weren't necessarily all the time. So you were pretty much helming close to
Yes.
every aspect of it. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
actually saw everything.
But I
that's
mean,
being
Phil
shot.
is very much a hands-on producer.
Right.
So I mean, he was more or less always there as well.
What did so back to 2005 then, and with Chris Eccleston. And now it was never announced that he was leaving until after, of course, the episode that all the production had wrapped. Was there a time during the course of the production where the mood changed once you realized that he was leaving, or was it tense in any way?
No, not really. I mean, because as soon as we sort of knew that it was going to be David Tennant, you just get that excitement again,
Right.
don't you? So.
But you didn't necessarily anticipate, David Tennant's coming by, and he's
No,
going to be no.
But I mean, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here. It was just another Doctor, so no. I mean, the atmosphere wasn't tense.
Which was more.
How can it be tense when you've got like the likes of John Barrowman and what have you? My God, I just remember, he and Billy disco dancing on the TARDIS,
Right.
So no, I mean.
What? So, as the series went along, then did you find any big changes in sort of the feel of it now once Series 2 started production, knowing now that Series 1 was such a success and that you were guaranteed 2 more after that from the BBC? Did that sort of change your outlook on how to make the show and the crew as well?
No, I mean, we certainly never got complacent, even though we might have had guaranteed commissions. We all strived, every single one of us, to make that next episode better than the episode before and better than the series before.
In Series 4, you went to Rome to shoot Fires of Pompeii. Is there a big thing about the fire or something on set? Is that like it's one of those things that sort of come up that like the crushed bus in Planet of the Dead. How do you deal with these massive calamities, so to speak, and still make the show work?
It would be so boring if I didn't have a challenge with everything. To actually film at Cinecittà Studios was fantastic. Have you ever been there?
No.
It is just, gangs of New York set there, and we actually used HBO's Rome set. To organise that meant several recce's with the directors of Cinecittà, first of all to budget it,
right?
Because when I first told them how much we had in our budget and how much they would get from the likes of Gangs of New York, he did admit, Maurizio, I forget his surname now, but he did admit that he fell off his chair. Because on our first recce there, Phil asked me how much was in the budget, and I told him, and he said, right, we just don't mention it this trip. And so we managed to skate over the money, and then it was only when we got back and I sent this email, and Maurizio did actually fall off his chair. So we had several recce's to try and negotiate a fee, and they did us the most brilliant deal ever.
Right. Wasn't part of the deal promotion by the BBC for the studio to help fill the gap? The budgetary gap?
It was all within our budget, so for that episode we had the same as we would for for any other episode that we did in the UK. But yeah, on our something like our second or third recce trip, and every recce out there, just something happened, like missing the planes and stuff like that. But we woke up one morning and Phil asked me if I'd seen the television, and I hadn't.
Right.
He told me that nearly half of Cinecittà Studios had gone up in flames overnight. So we made our way to the studio, and it was still smouldering, but luckily the half of the set that we wanted to use was fine. But yeah, to this day they don't know what caused it. But then one of the studio managers is sort of going around the set. smoking a cigarette.
Yes.
I have no idea how it happened, and flicking it, and I'm thinking, I sort of might have a clue.
Right. Did you find the budget was increased then over the 4 years?
No, not at all.
Not at all, really?
In a direction? Or?
It certainly didn't increase. I think what happened is, and it's the same with a lot of dramas, isn't it? They think if the channel think that you can achieve it for that, then they'll give you the same, if not less, for the next series. So no, we are very, very clever on Doctor Who. Honestly, our budgets are pure TV budgets, and yet we do manage to make them quite filmic.
Because there is a definite change between. I mean, no offense to the look of Series 1, but it has really evolved by Series 4. That it looks like more money is being spent on it. Even Series 2 was a big leap. You know, how did you do it then? How did you manage to juggle the funds?
For the was it Series 4 or Series 5? I can't remember, but certainly for the Easter special, that was our first change to HD cameras.
Yes.
So I mean that would give it a look. And again, it's just trying to do. I mean, because the channel were encouraging us to go HD. There was a certain amount of budget to help us with the new cameras. But that would go to make it different sort of feel and what have you, wouldn't it? So.
Did the money sort of, because of the gap year, what it's called now, where they just made the specials over 2009, did the same amount of money come each way to produce each episode, or was it a slightly more because they're used to funding a whole 13-episode series of Doctor Who?
It's funded by the amount of episodes you deliver. So it wouldn't be if there are slightly less, you could put more money into the pot for those. No, it's per episode delivered.
And even the length up, because of course the specials were longer than your average episode. Did they factor that in?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
What about the fact that you knew you had to ramp up to the end, where of course it's got to be massive? It's a big event, David Tennant back and all the rest of it. Did you have to sort of juggle things around?
You do. You have to speak to the writers and sort of go through and allow for a lower budget or a couple of lower budget episodes. I mean, I'm trying to think of examples of those.
Fear Her was sort of a cheaper one.
Exactly. The Lodger was meant to be. Turn Left.
Right. Yeah. Everyone claims Midnight is, but I heard that because
I didn't actually work on Midnight.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So I can't be that knowledgeable. But yes, I had heard that was.
It was a lower budget one, but I think it just brings up a point about how it looks like it's in one set, but all the principal actors are on set at all times, and that must cost money too.
Exactly.
So is your job sort of like juggling around when to have actors on set, and so if you can shoot something in one day and then release them?
I mean, cast costs and location costs. You know, there's certain locations that would only be available on a Sunday, what have you. So it's just making sure that we only visit those locations once, and yes, and just schedule in the cast so that obviously an expensive guest artist, we would, you know, rather than because it's 20 days. No, it's not. It's 12. We were shooting an episode in 12 days. So we used to do a block of 2 episodes, so that's 24 days for a block. And so we would, if it were 2-parter, for example, we would just make sure that we would, say something like River Song, we'd put her in just the first week, so we'd visit all the locations we had to in that first week, or the locations that she were at in that first week.
So how did your life change then when you became just full-fledged producer in Series 5?
I then realised how much I loved and missed Phil Collinson, because you just think, my God, you know, the responsibility and the first. The first episode that I produced was Easter Special, where we went to Dubai.
Yeah.
So not an easy one.
And the bus.
And the bus.
Yeah.
And the bus. But didn't our bus look gorgeous?
It did.
If Russell had originally written that, and we'd asked our art department, who are fantastic anyway, I'm sure that we would never have achieved that sort of look that we did from the crane.
So, Series 5 then was your last in Doctor Who. Why did you leave?
I left because after 5 years I'd seen the 3 doctors onto their TARDIS. And I just wanted to change, so I'm now working on Casualty, which is Britain's equivalent to ER.
Yeah.
And much longer running, too.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and it's Monday to Friday, not 11-day fortnight. So, yeah, I mean, I do miss Doctor Who, but I felt I'd done everything. I'd achieved every sort of challenge that I could have, but I do miss it.
And it misses you. The results were brilliant, Tracie. Well done.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, my lovely.
And last up today is the wonderful Dick Mills from the Radiophonic Workshop. From 2013, he was a guest. He'd put on a little seminar to explain how the Radiophonic Workshop worked back in the olden days. He's such a down-to-earth, working class bloke, just such a great time to talk to him. So me and Luke Harrison, actually, Tim Midwip, was at the convention that year, and we both had a keen interest in the Radiophonic Workshop and all that, so it only seemed natural for us to both sit down with Dick Mills to talk about the early days of the Radiophonic Workshop, and of course his continued work on from 1972 up into the end of the classic run in 1989. So here is the very entertaining Dick Mills. As has Dick Mills, our guest here, who's been involved in the Radiophonic Workshop since April 1st, 1958, I learned yesterday. No, was it then, or when did you join the RW? November of that year?
Same year, yeah.
Yeah, that same year?
Yeah.
And you came in, tell us how you actually got involved in the workshop.
Right. Do you want I won't bore you with my previous occupation before national service.
Right.
But I wasn't going back to an insurance office, so that's covered that. I joined the BBC as a recording engineer, which meant sitting in a remote recording channel, recording outputs from various other studios that I would then edit and then put out on transmission from another channel. Anyway, it came about, a notice came on the board, would somebody like to work or assist at the newly formed Radiophonic Workshop? And I thought, yes, I'm ready for a career move, if that's the right word. Always come back if I didn't like it. So I went over there because there'd been an upset in policy. Daphne Oram and Desmond Briscoe, two studio managers, had made such nuisances of themselves, borrowing portable equipment to experiment with and not putting them back afterwards. The BBC management decided to give them a room, I think is the phrase, isn't it? To get it out of their system. And they created this workshop stuffed with redundant equipment and odds and ends. But they added a rider that, in the interests of health, due to the experimental nature of the work and this terrible strain on one's creative mind, that nobody should be expected to work there for more than 6 months.
Really?
Which really pissed off Daphne Oram, because she'd been working towards setting up this electronic music studio. So she said, I shall have to consider my position. So she did, and resigned. Along with the two studio managers at the workshop, there were two engineers, which is a separate department to studio management, but they were two engineers, one of whom was one of Daphne's personal friends, and she felt that she ought to resign out of loyalty to Daphne. So that left a gap, hence the notice on the notice board that I applied for. And in a truly competitive sort of process, like one of one, I got the job. I went over there and joined them in 1958 as a recording engineer, helping the studio management people.
Right. You did a great presentation yesterday
at the
convention here that showed some awesome archival pictures of these huge beasts of machines.
Oh yes, made by motorcycle manufacturers from Sweden. Yeah.
Like was it an experimental thing on trying to get noises out of these things, or was everyone knew exactly what to do to get what noise they wanted?
No. All of the equipment was obviously audio test equipment for signal generators and filters, a lot of which came from studio design needs, where they'd put a frequency into a studio area to see if it created any objectionable standing waves and things like that. So we would nab things like that. But it was tape manipulation that really was our strength. We would, as I said, the paradox was we would use any pre-recorded sound we could get from the BBC effects library, manipulate it into all these nightmarish and surreal atmospheres, and then we'd have to transfer it back to disc so they could be used in the production we intended them for.
Right.
It's only later that other studios got, tape machines to play our stuff back on. So it was very much make it up as you go along, and mother is the something of
necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So do you feel that because of those restrictions and the craziness of all the machinery that you were more creative?
Not necessarily. I don't think anybody had the imagination at that time to think about voltage control and sequencers and things like that. The earliest, if you want to think about it, the earliest sequencer in the basic sense was a thing called the Mellotron, or whatever the BBC's version was called, PEG, portable event, which is a spring-loaded loop of tape of several seconds in a cabinet that you could record onto, and then you played it from a keyboard that ratcheted it up onto a continuous drive shaft, so you could play many of them. And then when you took your finger off, whang, the spring, wound it back again. So that was really the earliest form of sampling. You couldn't do much with it apart from play it back. But of course, as you saw in the presentation, our method of studying sound was to put it on a loop, so that we didn't have to keep winding the machine back and forth. Because time you played it, got to the filter and back, it had gone past. So we do that. A guy said, I was fascinated to see that you had loops that long. I said, no, that wasn't long. I said, think about it. The shorter the loop, the more chances you've got of hearing a join come round, especially if it's not a very good join. I said, our basic original workshop had 2 doors. I said, we would string a tape loop out one door, up the corridor and back in the other door, and use 2 or 3 machines at the doorways to pull it through. I said there was no chance of people hearing the join on that one because the repetition rate was so... Yeah, exactly. I would have never thought of that. So you think, I know, but, that's what you did. I tried to experiment once with... I became sort of fascinated with the editing joint. Technically, if you do a right-angle cut across a tape, if the tape machine's lined up perfectly with the replay head gap, you're going to get a click. So you always edited just off the 90 degrees, say, for stereo, or 45 degrees for normal. But then I thought, suppose you could edit very shallowly. And I actually built an editing block 18 inches long with a long, shallow cut. Okay? Because then if you made a loop, it would be such a long crossfade from one to another, you wouldn't hear the join so much. But the trouble came was, because the cut was so shallow, the razor blade just folded the tape underneath. And even if you could cut it, it was a hell of a job splicing it back.
Yeah, you got to get an 18-inch piece of tape.
Yeah. So, there were silly things like that we tried. I also tried wrapping a piece around a board, layers and layers of tape, oxide out. I got a separate record head, an amplifier, and actually tried to record on it just by painting on it, right? Then I'd get a replay head and try and read from it, because I thought I'd put it on in a random fashion. No way I'm going to use the same random fashion to get it off, so I could come across quite random sort of thing. And then you think, and you're only doing this within the context of the commission you're working on. There was no experimental time. If you were doing something that needed speech treatment for a monster, then you were experimenting with speech treatment during that time. Anything else, forget it until it came round again.
Now you, Brian Hodgson was responsible for the sound effects on Doctor Who. Or was he responsible, because you took over in 1972?
Yeah.
Roughly around that time.
Getting back to the beginning again, we worked in pairs.
Okay.
Because the studio management people were supposed to have the ideas while the engineers just kept the ship on the, show on the road. Brian and I worked together on Doctor Who right from the start. We both conjured up the TARDIS takeoff. We both worked on the Dalek speed. But shortly after that, our boss decided that if people could work on their own, he could double his workforce and he could double the need for studios. So that was empire building from his point of view. So Brian took over as full-time Doctor Who from then, and then Brian left to set his own studio up outside, and they asked me to take over in 71, and then I carried on right till the end of its run. So I mean the credit lines are blurred. I mean, I like to think I did as much towards the signature tune with Delia than has been made out, but then you're only famous after you're dead. I mean, Delia's become a cult, quite honestly. There's plays been written about her, manuscripts and theses and this, that and the other, and you think, well, if you only knew quite what went on, but there you go.
Well, this is your forum, Dick Mills. What part did you play in the creation of the most iconic theme show in television history?
I helped Delia put it together. She recorded twangs for the bass rhythm, and I probably edited just as much, Obviously, if you've got a rhythm, you can sort of put that on a loop and run off as many bars as you want, and then you string them all together without too many individual notes. No, and I came up with the sort of ideas and plugging up oscillators and the treatment and things like that. It was a very mutual thing. There was never any time where the demarcation between, look, I'm the guy who has the ideas, you know your place, So it was always a very, dual sort of mutual teamwork. So it would be unfair to deny her, but none of us hardly ever got credits in those days on screen. No. I mean, the signature tune was credited with Ron Grainer, BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which led people to believe that Ron Grainer worked there. Well, he didn't. He just gave us the music and let us get on with it. So we don't hold grudges or anything like that, because we didn't know we were legends, you see.
Did you get to see what they were doing visually for the title sequence?
No.
Or you just did the music and then...
Yeah, that's it. And then, you see, which would you rather be in a collaboration? Would you rather be presented with the lyrics and have to write the tune, or would you want to struggle with trying to fit the words to this tune that seems to be immovable?
Yeah, I guess.
I'm always with somebody, let somebody have the difficult idea first, and then I work to that, but then I'm lazy.
Yeah.
But no, I think they took the SIG tune away, and I think the original one was sort of slit scanning, wasn't it? There seemed to be two rollers that were going around with the image going like that, and also optical feedback as well.
That came later on the slit scan.
Did it?
But yeah, the optical feedback was what they started with.
Yeah.
I mean, I years ago I interviewed the guy who did that.
Oh, right, okay.
But he was in a position of having been presented with it and said, can you put some letters into it? And he said, no, we're going to have to book out the studio again so I can put the letters in whilst you're making it.
Yeah. Oh, right. So.
But I mean, the whole of it, what you were doing, what they were doing, just sounds very innovative to us.
Oh, yeah.
Because with a point and a click on a mouse, we can do loads of stuff now.
Yeah.
But to you, it was all physical.
Well, yeah,
which is crazy for us to
or analog, as they say.
It is now. But there's a certain feeling to the analog of it all, know, and that you can. I mean, the Doctor Who theme has been updated many times since then, but there's that certain.
But what we feel about the tune, is because it doesn't involve musical instruments of any shape or form. I'm not saying there's no human connection involved in it, but there's necessarily no obvious synthetic contribution in it either. because it's almost made out of organic sounds, because some of them were recorded acoustically and then stitched together. The vagaries of the tune that was done on an oscillator with a continuous sweep, you couldn't guarantee to hit the top of the note every time. So that's another unrobotic contribution that makes it feel live. And because you can't date it, because there's no known instruments in it, it's remained timeless, isn't it? It just almost happened.
Yeah. How did the I think obviously technology changed so much when you started doing the Doctor Who sound effects full time from '71. You just say up until the end. Did it creep out? Like, was there any great revolution? No.
Well, it didn't all come in together. First, we got little synthesizers, VCS3, with all their voltage control, whatever that meant. But it meant we could, things would interact within itself technically, and we wouldn't have to do separate treatments. You could cue the filter, you could trigger the filter, you could shape the filter, then you could get the filter shaping to alter the frequency that then did the filter. I mean, it was all sort of all this within itself, which made things a lot easier. Then we got computer software. I'm trying to think of the name of the software. Performer was one. I've forgotten the name of the other one. But then we developed our own composing software for music, which we called Sync Writer, which was based on a BBC B computer. And basically what it did, you looked at the video and you ran it, and every time there was a point you wanted to emphasise or hit, you did this, and it put markers on a time scale. Then you said, if you was a musician, look, the director thinks he wants a waltz for this, give us a tempo that's going to hit most of those marks, and it would. So that was the music guys, when the workshop was doing the music, did. Unfortunately, when the sequencers came along on the Mac that I used for sound, the fact that the display showed everything on a time scale in terms of flats and sharps didn't matter to me at all. I was only interested in event timings, and I never came across any software that was written for sound design, which was I wasn't saddened because I didn't have the imagination to realise what I was lacking, or what could do. But once the edited VT time code drove the sequencer, then we was home and dry, because you could put all your sounds in the right position. Then you'd run it again and make volume adjustments depending on how near or far they were. Then you thought, oh God, this is stereo, so you'd run it again and then do all your spatial things. So that was very handy in that respect. That made the job a lot easier. But we never got to the stage where we did our final tape with a striped time code down it and said, play this, and it'll fit the whole episode. We still took it to the television centre. I track laid all the backgrounds onto a multi-track, or they did. Well, I played the tapes in, so I knew where they fitted. And then we'd go through and put all the spot effects in, and then the sound engineer would remix the master soundtrack. I don't think you caught Philip the other day when he was talking about the old time, or I might have told you, where they fed the video up from downstairs to the dubbing suite. Well, we were standing by with our tapes with the music and the spot effects, and actually did it live. And then it was re-recorded back to video downstairs. Right. And if it went wrong, back to the beginning again.
Oh, wow.
Because there was no rock and roll or drop in or drop out facility there at all. I mean, it really was flying by the seat of your pants. But, you got through.
Well, it created the legend that is Doctor Who. I mean, I have Dick Mills sound effects on my phone and
ringtones,
ringtones, and in our podcast, there's many other people in here in Gallifrey One, and they're all credited to the Radiophonic Workshop.
Well, thank you very much. You've been very generous.
Well, they should be credited to Dick Mills.
Good.
You've done a lot for Doctor Who, and we thank you for that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. And that wraps it up for this episode on the Thursday. Tomorrow, so Friday, obviously, is when the convention proper would kick off. And since 2012, it's been our great honor to kick it off with the official launch panel, the live show that we've done over the years. And so we've cobbled together some greatest hits, some of our favorite panels over the years, all on this one show tomorrow. Peter Davison, Philip Hinchcliffe, the late Terrence Dix, 2-Minute Time Lord, Pete McTighe, Vinay Patel, Joy Wilkinson, Julian Glover, and Patricia Quinn, all tomorrow, Friday, on the Gallifrey One live show, Greatest Hits. So do join us for that, and join us all weekend for some Gallifrey One related content here on Radio Free Skaro. So until next time, I am Stephen Edmonton. So long for now.
You've been listening to Radio Free Skaro. Find us online at radiofreeskaro.com, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Radio Free Skaro, subscribe to us on iTunes, and donate to the show at patreon.com/Radio Free Skaro. Thank you.